The Buddha's real answer to what it all comes from. The Buddha tends to put aside most of the questions that activated Western philosophy. Who am I? Where did everything come from? Is there some benevolent intelligence in charge? Is there malevolent intelligence in charge of all things? The Buddha said that the beginning point of all this wandering on is inconceivable, not only unknowable, something you can't even conceive. And he did say there's no one in charge, so we can't blame our suffering on some being in charge of the universe. The question is how and why things are the way they are. The Buddha has, you look into the present moment. What are you doing in the present moment? He says everything is rooted in desire. All our actions come out of a desire to get something. And the nature of that desire is that it wants our actions really to have consequences. That's something we want. And it turns out that they do have consequences. The problem is that there are also unintended consequences. We see something that we want, then we look for the world in which that thing exists, and then we want to take on a role in that world so that we can get it. This whole construct is called becoming. It builds on the nature of desire. Desire is always moving someplace. When you look in the present moment, there's nothing static. It's moving. It's moving toward a goal. One question is whether you're going to get that goal or not. Another is, will it make you happy? That's all part of the desire. You want to find happiness. But sometimes the things we want are connected to other things. The thing we want is in a world that's connected to other things in that world. It takes a lot of insight to see the connections, to see the whole picture. That's the problem. We can't think of anything better. Ajahn Chah's simile is of a snake. You look at the tail of the snake and it looks like it'd be harmless to grab hold of. It doesn't have anything dangerous, but it's connected to the mouth and the mouth has teeth. So if you pull on the tail, you get bitten. After a while, you begin to see how the tail is connected to the mouth, and you avoid that. But often the connections are a lot subtler and harder to see, which is why we keep aiming at things that end up causing us trouble. This is what we've been doing, wandering on a slave to craving, as we chanted just now. That teaching comes from a sutta in which a young monk is talking to a king. The king had asked him why he had ordained, because the king assumed that most people ordained because they had family problems, they lost their relatives, lost their health, lost their money. Hard up, basically. Or in today's parlance, they were losers. But here the young monk came from a wealthy family. His parents were still alive. He was healthy. Why did he ordain? The monk gave a series of Dhamma summaries he said he learned from the Buddha. They start with, the world is swept away. All those things that you aim at just keep going away. It does not endure. It offers no shelter. There's no one in charge. You have nothing of your own. When you die, you have to leave everything behind as you go on. But then we're still a slave to craving. That's the problem. We can't think of anything better. We're not sure that there would be anything better. So we keep coming back for what we know, hoping to tweak it here, tweak it there, make it better. And we can to some extent. As the Buddha saw in the night of his awakening, there are some very high levels of heaven where the beings live for a long time. More than one universe. 40 universes sometimes. That's a long time. They think they've reached the goal. They aimed at acting in ways that lead to happiness, but it turns out that the results of their past good actions wear out, and they fall because they get complacent. So it takes a lot of determination to figure out the way out. We can't blame the situation on anybody. It's part of the nature of being a conscious agent, wanting something, acting on your wants, and then seeing the results of your actions. The Buddha basically took that combination, the combination of desire and being able to be sensitive to the results of your desires, and turned it into a path. As he said, that Dhamma is nourished by commitment and reflection. You commit yourself to a path of action, you reflect on it, again and again. You take your role as a conscious agent seriously. You try to keep as honest as possible, willing to do whatever is needed to act in ways that lead to true happiness. This is a lot of where we fail. We put forth an effort and either we don't get the results and we just kind of give up, or we do get the results and we get satisfied with them. Like the Brahmas, they're satisfied with where they are. The Buddha tried to teach them, but there were cases where he couldn't get through to them. They were just going to stay where they were. But of course, that meant that they were going to fall. It's when you really assume responsibility as a conscious agent that you can actually get out. We take this role that we've already started assuming and we take it seriously. Why are we assuming it to begin with? There's no answer to that, but just take it as part of being a conscious agent. This is what happens. You have to learn how to be more and more conscious of what you do with your agency. There's no need to complain about that. Just complain about your old habits. Sometimes it does seem as if samsara is a sick joke. You work really hard to get to some high level, up with the divas, up with the Brahmas. Then you hang out there and everything is very easy. You get lazy. Once you get lazy, then you're headed for a fall. You fall down and it hurts. How you respond to that hurt is going to be really important. The Buddha says it is. All the noble disciples say that it is. It's up to you to give it a try. There's a passage where the Buddha talks about dependent co-arising in an interesting way. In most of the cases, dependent co-arising ends with suffering. But there's one where you get to suffering, and then what comes next? Conviction. Conviction that there's got to be a way out. Based on that, you start acting in skillful ways. There's joy as a result. Based on the joy, there's concentration. Concentration leads to discernment. And discernment, in turn, leads to release. So you have to have the proper response to your suffering, which is that you're confident there's a way out and that you as a conscious agent can succeed in following that way. We see this in the two main emotions that are talked about most in the Theravada tradition, samvega on the one hand and pasada on the other. Samvega is when you get a strong sense of life going around and around and around, and it's pretty meaningless, so meaningless that the sufferings it entails seem terrifying. Pasada is when you're confident there's got to be a way out. The Buddha found that way out, as I said, in being really good at being a conscious agent. It was in that way that he discovered that the principles by which our actions give results start with two very simple principles, but they can get complex. This is why we're so deluded about what's connected to what the results of our actions really are. Some of our actions lead to results that don't give fruit for quite a while. By the time you get the fruit, you've forgotten whether you planted the seed. Other cases come immediately so quickly that it's hard to believe that what we did was related to what happened right then and there. When you have this combination, things can get complex because when something comes up, you don't know, does it come from something you're doing right now, or is it coming from something you did in the past? It could be either. It could be both. You've got to get the mind really still so that you can see these things clearly. After all, how do you think the Buddha discovered these things? He didn't have any texts to read and argue about. He just had his own mind and his ability to observe his actions, to observe the desires on which they were based. He developed really good mindfulness and alertness so that he could see connections that other people hadn't seen before, connections between causes and effects. First came his understanding about long-term causes, in other words, how you do something, and then it leads to a result in a succeeding lifetime. But then he saw even that was not as simple as many people had taught. It's not that case that you simply add up all your good actions in this lifetime, subtract all the bad actions, and then go to whatever the result is. He said it had a lot to do with your state of mind at the moment of death. That could cancel out a lot of good karma, or not really cancel it, but delay it for a long time. A bad state of mind can delay some good karma. A good state of mind can delay some bad karma. which got him to reflect that some things have an immediate impact that have nothing to do with your past actions. That showed him the possibility of freedom. Otherwise, if everything were dependent on your past actions, everything would be totally determined. But here we have choices. He started looking into those choices in the present moment. That's what led to his third knowledge, which led to his true awakening. So you see these things in the mind when it's really quiet and you stick with the determination to find the way out. Think of the Buddha on the night of his awakening. He gained many knowledges that a lot of people before him were very satisfied with. People in the past had gained knowledge of their own previous lifetimes. They'd gained knowledge of seeing how beings are reborn after death, and they stopped there, satisfied. But the Buddha realized that this still didn't end the problem of suffering. So he took the knowledge he'd gained from those first two knowledges and applied it to the question of what is the suffering right now? What's causing it? And is there a path of practice that leads to an end of suffering? He found that there was. That came from his determination, focus, strong honesty, and strong willingness to do whatever was required to get out. So, strong desire, strong awareness, those qualities of a conscious agent just raised to an nth degree, and that takes you out. When you get out, then, you don't need to be a conscious agent anymore. Being a conscious agent is this role that we take on because we have a sense of lack. When there's no lack, then we can let that role go. For a lot of us, we're more attached to our sense of our own identity than we are to the idea of a happiness that would be total and complete. But when you remember that your sense of identity came from the sense of lack and is maintained by a sense of lack, maybe you can change your attitude. Maybe a conscious happiness that's outside of space and time would be a good thing. The Buddha says it is. All the noble disciples say that it is. It's up to you to give it a try. Dhamma is what Dhamma does. You may know the story. The Buddha was once staying in a Simsapa forest with a group of monks. He picked up a few Simsapa leaves, which are like miniature aspen leaves, and asked the monks which was greater, the number of leaves in his hand or the number of leaves in the forest. The monks replied that, of course, there were far more leaves in the forest than in his hand. The Buddha went on to say that in the same way the things he had known through direct knowledge but had not taught were like the leaves in the forest. The things he had taught based on his direct knowledge were like the leaves in his hand. Why had he taught so little? Because in his words, the things he had not taught were not connected with the goal, do not relate to the rudiments of the holy life, and do not lead to disenchantment, to dispassion, to cessation, to stilling, to direct knowledge, to self-awakening, to unbinding. And what had he taught? The Four Noble Truths. This is stress. This is the origination of stress. This is the cessation of stress. This is the path of practice leading to the cessation of stress. And why had he taught that? Because these truths were connected with the goal, did relate to the rudiments of the holy life, and did lead to disenchantment, to dispassion, to cessation, to stilling, to direct knowledge, to self-awakening, to unbinding. SN 5631. This incident makes an important statement about how to read and understand the Buddha's Dhamma. He wasn't interested in stating truths simply because they were true. He taught truths that served a purpose. When his listeners acted on those truths, those actions would have a desired impact on their minds. It's good to take a close look at how he expresses the nature of that impact. He starts by using the word goal. In Pali, the word is yathā, which means not only goal but also meaning benefit, purpose, profit. This word rarely appears in Western discussions of the Dhamma, but it's frequently paired with the word Dhamma in Asia. Useful truths are said to be both yathā and Dhamma. In fact, the whole point of the Dhamma is that it has an yathā. The Four Noble Truths are a special kind of Dhamma in that they cover everything needed to serve that yathā, beginning with the rudiments of the holy life. This is a shorthand reference to the virtues of the 5 precepts as well as the atha itself, the attainment of total unbinding and unconditioned dimension. That's the highest possible happiness, SN 43, DHP 203. In some cases, the atha of a Dhamma teaching is its meaning as expressed in words that are easier to understand. But in the Buddha's remarks in the Simsapa forest, the word atha obviously means something more than words, a direct experience of the goal, the reality of the freedom and liberation that the teaching is supposed to lead to. These two aspects of atha are closely related. We could even say that you don't fully know the meaning of the words of the Dhamma until you've directly experienced the goal to which they point and which is their whole purpose for being. The Buddha was wise in emphasizing this purposeful aspect of the Dhamma because the mind, as he accurately saw, is purposeful as well. It doesn't simply gaze at views about the truth in rapt admiration. In its quest to eliminate pain or suffering, it constructs views about the truth and acts on them to serve its aims. To evaluate the worth of a truth, you have to look into the mind state that inspires you to assemble it, the purposes it inspires you to aim at, and the actions it inspires you to take. This was precisely the Buddha's approach. He saw that if you adopt a particular view or line of questioning, it would bend the mind in the direction of the mind state that created it. If you acted on the view, those actions would have a further impact on the mind, leading to experiences of pleasure or pain depending on whether those actions were skillful or not. This is why the Buddha regarded views about truth as a type of karma, or action. In turn, he viewed those actions as part of a causal process, judging them by where that process ultimately led. If they led to an inferior goal, he would reject them, DN1. As for the views he himself taught, he chose them because they would inspire the kind of actions that would lead to total freedom from suffering. This active role of the Dhamma is explicitly clear in the case of the 4 noble truths. Each truth carries a duty. It's a guide to action. You should comprehend stress, abandon its origination or cause within the mind, realize its cessation, all by developing the path to its cessation. The Buddha didn't impose these 4 duties on anyone. He simply pointed out that if you want to put an end to suffering and stress, this is what you have to do. At the same time, it's worth noting not only that the 4 noble truths contain the 4th noble truth, which is a guide to action, but also that they themselves are contained in the 4th truth, the factor of right view in the Noble Eightfold Path. As a container for that path, the 4 truths explain why the path is a beneficial one to follow. As a factor in the path, they show that views are actions to be adopted, both because they're true and because they act as a guide to beneficial action in the form of the other factors of the path, leading to a goal that lies beyond them. This is why when the Buddha gave metaphors for the path, including right view, he chose modes of transport like rafts and chariots means to a destination. When you reach the destination, the mode of transport can be put aside, MN 22, MN 24, SN 45-4. In fact, he made it a general rule for him to say something it had to be not only true, but also beneficial in leading to skillful action. Further, he had to be sensitive to his audience, knowing when to say beneficial truths that were pleasing, and when to say beneficial truths that were not. He gave the analogy of a baby child with a sharp object in its mouth. Sometimes, you have to be willing to draw blood if that's what's required to get the object out before the child swallows it and suffers greater harm, MN 58-50. So the Buddha had to be strategic in how he taught the Dhamma. Unlike other teachers of his time, he didn't have a canned Dhamma that he rattled off to all his listeners DN2. This may be why his followers presented their memory of his teachings in the form of dialogues to show how the Buddha presented different aspects of the Dhamma to different listeners in line with the situation, and their specific needs, sometimes truths that pleased them, sometimes truths that didn't, but always truths that were beneficial. It's important to note, though, that in the Buddha's analysis of the possible varieties of speech, the idea that a falsehood could be beneficial was never even entertained as a possibility. The concept of useful fictions was, as far as he was concerned, out of the question. A strategic distinction. The Buddha's strategic approach to teaching is also shown by the distinction he made between teachings whose atha had to be drawn out into further explanations, and those whose atha was already drawn out and should not be drawn out any further in 224. This distinction was so important that he said, "You were slandering him if you got it mixed up trying to infer a further meaning of a teaching whose meaning was already drawn out, or claiming that there was no need for any further interpretation of a teaching that actually needed it." Unfortunately, he didn't give examples for these two categories of teachings, but when we remember that the Dhamma is meant as a guide to action, one way of interpreting the distinction seems clear, and it's supported by watching the Buddha in action as he teaches. Some teachings don't give clear instructions for action. Instead, they describe the reality of a situation. In this case, the meaning has to be drawn out. What are the practical implications of that situation? An example would be the Buddha's descriptions of how the universe evolves, which portray events in far distant reaches of the past and the future without giving explicit instructions as to how you should act. At the very end of the descriptions, though, the Buddha himself draws out the meaning. The changes in the universe come from the actions of living beings. So if you want to avoid the miseries that can be found in the universe, take care to act skillfully. DN 26:27. As for teachings whose meaning shouldn't be drawn out any further, two prime examples are the Buddha's teachings on self and not self. Nowhere in the canon does the Buddha say either that there is a self or that there is no self. Questions of who am I, do I exist, do I not exist, he says, are not worthy of attention. In fact, he goes on to say that views that attempt to answer these questions, such as I have a self or I have no self, are a fetter bound by which you're not freed from suffering and stress, MN2. So to stay on the path, you should try to avoid paying attention to such questions. And it's not the case that they'll get answered at awakening. As SN 1220 points out, once you've attained even the first level of awakening, these questions no longer hold any meaning or interest for you. Still, for the purpose of arriving at awakening, the Buddha does analyze how the assumption of self comes about, pointing out how some assumptions of self are not skillful, while other assumptions of self in certain circumstances are. You can make use of the things that you identify as you or yours, such as perceptions and thought fabrications, as means to the goal, AN 936. In addition, assumptions that you have to depend on yourself, that you're capable of the practice, and that you will benefit from it all play a necessary role in pursuing the path, DHP 160, and 159, and 340. The Buddha calls this approach using the self as a governing principle. So even though he refuses to say that there is a self, he makes use of self as a strategy on the path. At the same time, he points out how not self is a useful perception at many stages in the path, and particularly in the last ones as a tool for comprehending stress and abandoning its cause. Because ideas of self contain an element of clinging which the First Noble Truth equates with suffering. SN 5611, the perception of not self is a useful tool for bringing that clinging to an end. This perception is even useful at a very high level of the practice for overcoming any attachment to the path or the goal, so that the mind freed from all attachments, including any attachments to the perception not self, can reach total liberation in 1093. So here again, even though the Buddha refuses to say that there is no self, he uses not self as a Dhamma teaching leading to a higher yathā. This point is illustrated most clearly in MN 109. There, a monk listening to the Buddha teaching that the 5 aggregates of form, feeling, perception, fabrications, and consciousness are not self draws out what he thinks is a logical implication of the teaching. So form is not self, feeling is not self, perception is not self, fabrications are not self, consciousness is not self. Then what self will be touched by the actions done by what is not self? In other words, the monk reasons that because the aggregates are all not self, there must be no self, so no actions will be able to touch that is give karmic results to what is not self. This line of reasoning would serve a very unskillful yathā, giving license to all kinds of unskillful behavior. That's why the Buddha, on reading the monk's mind, rebukes him sharply, saying that he's senseless, immersed in ignorance, and overcome with craving. The Buddha then goes on to show the proper strategic use of the teaching on not self-questioning the other monks listening to the talk about their assumptions of self around the aggregates, so that they'll perceive the aggregates as not self, to develop dispassion for them and to gain release the yathā, both of the perception of not self and of the Dhamma as a whole. So even though the Buddha found useful roles at certain stages in the path, both for the assumption of a self and for the perception of not self, those teaching strategies have their meaning fully drawn out. In neither case should you infer from them that there is or is not a self, for those views, as the Buddha pointed out, would induce actions leading away from the goal. Tests for the true Dhamma. The relationship between the Dhamma and its yathā is so direct that the Buddha made it a criterion for testing what was true Dhamma and what was not. If you followed a Dhamma teaching and it led you to the yathā he taught an experience of unbinding, then you knew that it was the genuine article. He framed this test in different terms, from the most basic to the most refined, depending on his audience. For the Kalamas, a group of skeptical laypeople, he outlined a very basic test. If when you act on a teaching it leads to long-term welfare and happiness, then you should keep following that teaching. AN 366. For his stepmother, Mahapajapati Gautami, he framed a more extensive test. True Dhamma can be recognized by what it leads to in 3 areas. In terms of the ultimate goal, it should lead to dispassion and being unfettered. In terms of the means to that goal, to shedding contentment and arouse persistence. In terms of the relationships it fosters toward others, it should lead to modesty, reclusiveness, and being unburdensome. And 853. For Ven Upali, one of his foremost monk students, the Buddha formulated a test, echoing his comments to the monks in the Simsapa forest. True Dhamma, when put into practice, leads to utter disenchantment, to dispassion, to cessation, to stilling, to direct knowledge, to self-awakening, to unbinding. And 780. The Buddha saw the need for this sort of test in his own lifetime, as there are reported instances of monks distorting the teachings even to his face. MN 22, MN 38. He dealt with them severely to show how seriously he meant for his Dhamma not to be changed. He also stated that those who attributed sayings to him that he didn't say, or denied his saying things that he actually did say, were slandering him. And 223. He also foresaw that the tendency to distort the Dhamma would increase after his passing, saying that the true Dhamma would disappear in 500 years. And 851. For those of us living more than 500 years after his passing, it's a forecast that brings us up short. Is there no true Dhamma left anymore? But SN 1613 gives an analogy to explain what he meant. The true Dhamma disappears when counterfeit. Dhamma appears in the same way that genuine money disappears when counterfeit money begins to circulate in the market. In other words, genuine money is still there, but people begin to lose their confidence as to what's genuine and what's not. In the same way, true Dhamma can still exist, but it's surrounded by so much counterfeit Dhamma that even the concept of true Dhamma as opposed to false gets called into question. When counterfeit Dhamma actually came into circulation, and what it taught is a matter of historical conjecture. A prime candidate is the teaching on the non-arising of phenomena, which appeared about 500 years after the Buddha's passing, and claims that nothing really arises or passes away, and that everything is a timeless oneness. If this were true, then the Four Noble Truths would not be true, for they speak of suffering arising and passing away. But again, whether this is the teaching that the Buddha had in mind when he foresaw counterfeit Dhamma is just a matter of conjecture. What's undeniable, though, is that the Buddha's definition of the disappearance of the true Dhamma describes the situation that prevails now with so many contradictory versions of the Dhamma at large in the world. Some people even laugh at the idea that any version of the Dhamma has any right to claim to be right and others wrong. They make a comparison with maps. Just as every map distorts reality, so that no single map can claim to be a totally accurate description of the truth, in the same way every version of the Dhamma distorts reality, and so no version can qualify as exclusively right. But this is a misreading of the map analogy. Neither maps nor the Dhamma are meant to be contemplated in and of themselves. They serve a purpose and yathā, and their accuracy can be tested by seeing if they actually serve the purpose intended for them. The fact that a map distorts some aspects of reality is no problem as long as it provides accurate directions for arriving at the goal for which it was drawn. If you're drawing a treasure map, for instance, you'll have to leave out some information. In fact, if you clutter the map with too many extraneous details, it becomes confusing and counterproductive. All that matters is that the route to the treasure is portrayed clearly enough to be followed, and that the route actually leads to the treasure. In the same way the Dhamma is expressed in words, and the nature of words is that they provide only a sketch of the reality they describe. But even then, they can still serve a good yathā if the lines of the sketch act as a reliable guide to take you to that yathā. Just as a map shouldn't be cluttered with extraneous information, the Buddha found it advisable to avoid most of the philosophical debates about the nature of the world and the self extant in his day, so that his Dhamma could focus on being accurate in the basics, what's needed to get to the treasure of unbinding. We like to think that the contradictions among available Dhamma maps are immaterial, that they simply point out alternative routes to the same goal. But the fact of the matter is that they describe not only different routes, but also different locations for the treasure. They even describe the treasure in different terms. So they can't all be right, as we noted in the case of the Four Noble Truths and the teaching of the non-arising of phenomena, which means that we have to choose among them. Given that the Dhamma is not always pleasing, we can't let our likes and dislikes determine our choice. In fact, even when a Dhamma seems reasonable and fits in with what we already believe, that doesn't mean that it's true and 366. Our only hope of finding the true Dhamma is to test it, to choose a Dhamma that seems promising and put it into practice to see where it leads. This test entails more than reading and reasoning about texts. It requires high levels of commitment and honesty and keen powers of observation of your own actions and their results, character traits that the Buddha looked for in all his students, MN 80, SN 324. It's only through being true yourself that you can know if the Dhamma is true. But then the Dhamma promises a lot of truth in return, not just a theory about happiness, but a direct, unchanging experience of the highest happiness possible. This is its yathā. The potential reality of that yathā is what keeps the Dhamma a living tradition, Without that yathā, it would be nothing more than an historical curiosity, some theories about the mind and the world that faraway people believed in the far distant past. It's because the Four Noble Truths are designed to be strategic, leading to a living experience that lies beyond the words that, even now, after all these centuries, we still care about the Buddha's handful of leaves. Things as they can be. What happens in awakening? There are instances in the canon where the Buddha teaches his listeners to analyze experience into the 5 aggregates of form, feeling, perception, thought fabrication, and consciousness, and to view those aggregates in terms of what Buddhist tradition has termed the 3 characteristics, or what the Buddha himself called perceptions, or labels sanya, the perceptions of inconstancy, stress, and not self. There are other instances in which he teaches his listeners to apply the same perceptions to the 6 sense media, the eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and intellect. In both cases, his listeners, on adopting these perceptions, often gain awakening, either their first glimpse of awakening called the arising of the Dhamma I, SN 3574, or the total awakening that brings about once and for all the end of birth-death, and the total mass of suffering and stress, SN 2259, MN 109. Frequently, the arising of the Dhamma I is expressed as a realization often translated as, whatever is subject to arising is all subject to passing away. This sounds like an affirmation of the perception of inconstancy. You see that yes, all things that arise pass away. This interpretation of what's seen by the Dhamma I is reinforced by a compound often used to describe all the different stages of awakening, yathā-bhūta-ñāṇa-dassana. This compound is typically translated as knowledge and vision of things as they are. Here again, this sounds as if awakening comes when you affirm, based on your own vision and knowledge, that the 3 perceptions really are true. The question is, if this interpretation is correct, then what kind of experience would count as a valid affirmation of the 3 perceptions? After all, everyone can see that things in general are impermanent. What's so special about the Dhamma I? And why would the canon say that it has a huge impact on the mind of the person to whom it arises? On top of that is the statement about whatever is subject to arising, really a valid generalization. No one has seen everything that arises, so how can they make a legitimate statement about everything subject to arising? Sometimes we're told that the Dhamma I comes as a result of deep reflection on the implications of the 3 perceptions, but what kind of reflection? And how deep? And does this description fit in with the Buddha's own standards of what counts as a valid affirmation of the truth? There are 2 reasons to think not. The first is based on the Buddha's own statements about the truth of perceptions. They're insubstantial, he says, like mirages, SN 2295. They show at best only partial view of what they reflect. Perceptions are representations, and no representation can give all the details of what it represents. It's true only to the extent that the partial view it gives can adequately serve our purposes. In addition, perceptions are fabricated through intentions, and we know how unreliable intentions can be. SN 2279. The Buddha himself noted that even though the 3 perceptions are always true, and 3137, they're not always beneficial. MN 109, MN 136. In other words, there are times when holding to them can interfere with the path to the end of suffering. And the perception of stress, for one, doesn't tell the whole story about the aggregates, because the aggregates have their pleasant side as well, SN 2260. If it weren't for that pleasant side, the Buddha tells us we wouldn't fall for them as we do again and again. So it would seem as of awakening, at least by the Buddha's standards, should not be seen as an act of assenting to the truth of perceptions, inasmuch as even the most enlightening perceptions are only partial representations of the truth. The unreliability of perceptions in general means that the knowledge and vision that constitutes awakening can't be mediated by perceptions, but that raises a further question. What kind of knowledge and vision would that be? Everything known through the senses involves labels and perceptions. Then there's the second reason for thinking that awakening viewed as the affirmation of the truth of the three perceptions wouldn't meet the Buddha's own standards for what counts as a reliable way of arriving at the truth. This reason is based on his discussions of the invalid ways in which people commonly become convinced of the truth of a particular view or teaching. These ways include logic reasoning deductively from general principles, inference reasoning inductively from individual experiences to general principles, analogies seeing how something unfamiliar has parallels with something familiar, and what the Buddha termed agreement through pondering views, thinking seriously about a teaching until you decide that it makes sense and that it fits in with your experience or what you already believe. None of these ways of arriving at the truth, the Buddha states, is really trustworthy. As he notes, beliefs supported by these reasons could turn out to be true, or they could be false, AN 366. MN 95, which means that on their own they can't serve as reliable methods for ascertaining the truth. Now, if awakening meant assenting to the truth of the three perceptions, it would fall either under inference or agreement through pondering views, or both. You ponder until you infer from your limited range of personal experience that all things that arise pass away. But again, if this is awakening, it wouldn't meet the Buddha's standards for what counts as a reliable basis for affirming the truth. The texts say that one of the attributes of people who have gained the Dhamma I is that their confidence in the Dhamma has been verified in 1092, but this type of awakening from his point of view would verify nothing. The question is, did the Buddha think that awakening happened in this way, that it meant affirming the truth of the three perceptions? In other words, did he hold to a picture of awakening that, unbeknownst to him, didn't meet his own standards for what's a reliable guide to the truth? His words as reported in the canon suggest two main reasons for why the answer is no. These reasons have to with one, the larger context of how he describes awakening in the rest of the discourses, and two questions of translation. The view that awakening means affirming the truth of the three perceptions is based on taking a few passages out of context and on mistranslating some key terms, what is seen by the Dhamma I, and what kind of knowledge and vision constitutes awakening. Because the correct translation of these terms becomes clear when taken in the larger context, we have to look at the context first. Context. Admittedly, it's true that the Buddha uses logic, inference, and analogy in presenting the Dhamma to others, and he does advise his listeners to ponder the teaching until they agree that it makes enough sense for them to want to put it into practice. But those are just preliminary steps before actually getting on the path. You arrive at awakening only when you exert right effort based on what you've learned, MN 95. In other words, awakening is based not on what you agree to as right, but on what you do, and what you experience as a result of what you do. This point is shown clearly by the Buddha's description of the event on which all other descriptions of awakening are based his own experience of awakening. In none of his autobiographical accounts of the awakening experience does he mention the three perceptions. Instead, all of his accounts center on either of two themes: understanding and fulfilling the duties of the Four Noble Truths, or understanding cause and effect as they play out in the steps of dependent co-arising, leading to suffering, and then using that knowledge to put an end to those steps. In both cases, These themes focus not just on things as they are, but more primarily on things as they function, how, through the principles of cause and effect, they have the potential to lead either to suffering or to the end of suffering. We can call this things as they can be. Take the duties of the Four Noble Truths. The Four Truths are the truths of suffering, its origination, samudaya, its cessation, nirodha, and the path to its cessation. Each truth has its own duty. 1. You have to comprehend that suffering is the act of clinging with desire and passion to the 5 aggregates. 2. You have to abandon through dispassion the origination of that clinging, which is craving. 3. You have to realize the cessation of suffering through dispassion for craving. 4. And to arrive at that dispassion, you have to develop the 8 factors of the Noble Path. The Buddha often describes the first glimpse of awakening as seeing in your immediate experience that this is suffering. This is the origination of suffering. This is the cessation of suffering, and this is the path to the cessation of suffering, and 312, and 374. The way these statements are phrased with the repeated emphasis on this suggests that the Buddha is talking about a direct experience of these things. In other words, you've done some of the work. You've developed the path enough to have a glimpse of the cessation of suffering. The suggestion that this experience includes direct knowledge of the path is confirmed by the fact that the other main term for the arising of the Dhamma I entry into the stream defines the stream as all 8 factors of the Noble Eightfold Path, SN 55.5. You've seen all the factors from right view through right concentration come together in the mind. The suggestion that this experience includes direct knowledge of cessation is confirmed by several passages in the canon. MN 48 notes that one of the prerequisites for verifying that you've had your first glimpse of awakening is when you can answer yes to this question. When I cultivate, develop, and pursue this view, do I personally obtain tranquility? Do I personally obtain unbinding nibbana, MN? One adds that those who have attained the Dhamma I in its terminology, those who have become learners, have directly known unbinding. When Sariputta, after the arising of the Dhamma I, was asked by his friend Moggallana if he had reached the deathless, he replied, "Yes, I have MV1." 23.5. It's this direct experience beyond the 6 senses and unmediated by perceptions or any mental fabrications that can actually verify your conviction in the Dhamma. So there's more going on in awakening than just assenting to right view. You have to follow through with the duties assigned by right view until you've reached a level of dispassion strong enough to bring about a glimpse of unbinding. Instead of simply affirming that things arise and pass away, you make the right path arise, and you make the wrong path pass away. And in doing so, you don't just affirm the principle of inconstancy. You discover that some inconstant things have the potential to lead you to something you've never experienced before, a permanent dimension, SN 43, that lies entirely beyond inconstancy. It lies even beyond the path. After all, the path is composed of aggregates, and so it too is inconstant, and 936. This is why SN 48.3 notes that those who have gained the Dhamma I have seen the escape from the factors of the path as expressed under the 5 faculties of conviction, persistence, mindfulness, concentration, and discernment. It's also why Anathapindika, a lay follower who had gained the Dhamma I, said that by pursuing right view, he saw the escape from it, in 1093. So gaining the Dhamma I is not just a matter of affirming the perceptions that go into right view. It means using those perceptions as tools and then putting them aside when they've done their work in showing not just things as they are, but as they can be made to be. You've discovered the potentials within those things if you use them right to lead beyond themselves. This is precisely how the 3 perceptions and perceptions in general function in the Buddha's descriptions of awakening. Here, we have to remember the Buddha's own standards for what he would teach. For him to make a statement, it had to be not only true but also beneficial, MN 58. The same standards applied to the perceptions he would have you apply to your experiences. As he noted when stating that the aggregates have both their pleasant and their unpleasant side, if you get obsessed with perceiving them as pleasant, it leads to infatuation, captivation, and defilement. In other words, even though the perception of pleasure may be true in some contexts, it's not beneficial when viewed in the context of the duties of the Four Noble Truths. Instead of getting you to abandon passion, it leads you to develop more passion and to cause more suffering. If, however, you focus on the unpleasant side of the aggregates as when you apply the three perceptions to them, it leads to disenchantment, dispassion, and purification. SN 2260. This would be in line with the duties of the Four Noble Truths to induce dispassion, so the result will lead to the end of suffering. This corresponds to how the Buddha explicitly describes how the three perceptions function in leading to awakening when a listener sees in line with these perceptions that all aggregates past, present, future, near or far, blatant or subtle, are inconstant, stressful, and not self. The Buddha doesn't say that the listener simply agrees with those perceptions. He says that the listener grows disenchanted with the aggregates and so becomes dispassionate, SN 2259. From that dispassion comes release, in other words, a direct experience of the third noble truth. So here again, these perceptions are used not only because they're true representations of the truth, but also because they have a liberating effect on the mind. That's how the role of the three perceptions in leading to awakening should be understood. They function as aids in performing the duties appropriate to the Four Noble Truths. Like all perceptions, they're fabricated for a purpose, SN 2279. Here, their purpose is the highest one possible, bringing about the dispassion that brings total release. Given that that's the context for understanding how the three perceptions actually function in the steps leading to awakening, we can see that awakening, as the Buddha describes it, is not simply a matter of assenting to the truth of these perceptions. As for questions of translation, when we look carefully at the original Pali version of the statement expressing what's seen by the Dhamma eye, we can see that to translate it as whatever is subject to arising is all subject to passing away is clearly a mistake. And when we look at the phrase knowledge and vision of things as they are in the larger context of the discourses, we can see that while that may be a possible translation of the term yathā-bhūta-ñāṇa-dassana, it misses many of the implications contained in that larger context. In other words, the translations used to support the idea that awakening is simply a matter of affirming the truth of right view are not accurate representations of what the discourses have to say about awakening. First, the Dhamma eye. The correct translation is whatever is subject to origination, samudaya Dhamma, is all subject to cessation, nirodha Dhamma. Now, as we've seen in the context of the Four Noble Truths, origination is not just a matter of arising, it's a matter of causation. And in almost every case where the discourses use the word origination, it denotes causes coming from within the mind. In the context of the Four Noble Truths, that's always the case. Similarly, with cessation, it doesn't mean just passing away, it means total ending. And in the context of the Four Noble Truths, it means ending through dispassion. So what the sentence is actually saying is that anything that arises through acts of the mind can all be brought to cessation through dispassion, because the aggregates and sense media are all experienced through acts of the mind. As the Buddha said, all phenomena are rooted in desire. Then, when there's thorough dispassion for them, there's nothing to keep them going. So they all cease. That's when unbinding is experienced, inasmuch as unbinding is the end of all phenomena, AN 1058. What's revealed at that point is consciousness, without surface, limitless, reflecting off of no object, totally independent of the six senses, unmediated by any perceptions or thought constructs at all, MN 49. It's in this way that the expression of what's seen by the Dhamma I is entirely in line with the fact that those who have gained the Dhamma I have seen unbinding. That expression is not a mere description of things as they exist on their own, affirming the principle of inconstancy. It's a statement of possibilities. If you practice properly putting the aggregates into the form of the correct path, you can bring about the dispassion that leads to release. As for the compound knowledge and vision of things as they are, yathā-bhūta-ñāṇa-dassana, this has a similar meaning. The key word in the compound is Bhuta. This word can either be a noun meaning truth or reality on the one hand, or a past participle meaning has come to be or has come into being on the other. The first set of meanings yields the translation of the whole compound as knowledge and vision of things, as they are indicating that you see things simply as they actually exist. The second set yields knowledge and vision of things as they have come to be, indicating that you see the causal processes by which things come about. On their own, both renderings are plausible, but SN 1231 gives preference to the second. There the Buddha asks Ven, Sariputta, "Do you see this?" Buddha Sariputta answers not with a description of the three perceptions, but with an account of how things come into being based on nutriment, another way of saying how they arise and subsist based on causes. He notes that both a learner, one who has gained the Dhamma I, and the fully awakened arahant see that this comes into being based on nutriment and that it is subject to cessation based on the cessation of that nutriment. MN9 indicates that this here denotes suffering and any of the factors of the four noble truths and dependent co-arising that lead to suffering. In fact, these statements about nutriment are a shorthand version of the Four Noble Truths. This would be the truth of suffering. Nutriment would be the truth of the origination of suffering. The cessation of this and its nutriment would be the truth of the cessation of suffering. And MN9 indicates that the practice that leads to the cessation of the nutriment would be the truth of the path of practice, leading to the cessation of suffering, the Noble Eightfold Path. Where the learner differs from the arahant is that the learner, having seen how the nutriment is in turn nurtured by passion, practices to develop more dispassion for its total cessation. In other words, the learner sees not only the principle of causality at work here, but also the fact that that principle is generated through mental acts. Our experience of these things comes from our passion for them. That's why dispassion can bring about total cessation. As for arahants, they don't have to work any further at dispassion. They've already developed enough dispassion for these things so as to be totally released from them. So this is what's meant by knowledge and vision of things as they've come to be. You've gained enough mastery of cause and effect to undo those causes, bringing about at least a glimpse of the cessation of suffering in the experience of unbinding. That way you've directly seen that all results subject to origination are in fact subject to cessation. You've seen them being originated, you've seen them cease. And when they've ceased, you've seen what isn't originated and doesn't cease. The earth shook again. This is how both of the terms normally used to support the idea of awakening as assenting to the three perceptions. Whatever is subject to origination is all subject to cessation, and knowledge and vision of things as they've come to be actually support a totally different view of awakening when they're correctly translated. The Buddha recommended the three perceptions not simply to gain the assent of his listeners, but to have an effect on their minds. In the context of the Four Noble Truths, these perceptions are used not just to indicate how things are, but also as part of a larger program using knowledge of how things have come to be in order to reveal an unexpected aspect of how things can be how inconstant and stressful fabrications can be turned into a path of virtue, concentration, and discernment in order to develop dispassion for all the mind's activities, resulting in the unending freedom of the deathless. When the reality of this possibility appears in the heart, it has a much greater impact than a mere act of assent or affirmation. Having stepped outside of the six senses, you now view all the events in the six senses in a radically new light. This upends many of your old preconceived notions of what's possible and what's not. No wonder then that when the Buddha fully awakened to the total release provided by this truth, the earth shook. And no wonder that when he was able to teach his first noble disciple to gain a glimpse of that same truth, the earth shook again.